Hello, I'm Coach Darren Slack for Ask NFA. And again, we want to thank everyone for the great questions they're sending in. Please be thinking about what you'd like us to address in future episodes. But during this episode, I'm only going to take one question because it's the most common one we get from parents regarding the application of our training mechanics. Also, there are multiple things to consider with this question, so it's going to take a bit more time to work this one out. All right, so here it is. How do you handle a local coach teaching quarterback mechanics different from what we learned at an NFA camp or an NFA training? It's a great question. Our commitment at NFA has always been and will continue to be serving the school and local youth coach by giving them better developed quarterbacks that require less input and who are better leaders. That will always be our focus. But there are many great QB coaches out there too, and I do hope you have one that serves your son's highest needs. Unfortunately, there are times when coach preference will clash with the priorities of sound throwing mechanics. Now, I say coach preference because there are times when what the coach prefers is something they heard somewhere that they consider to be correct, but it isn't actually helpful to the quarterback. Or they may overemphasize a concept they feel is important when something else may be more critical. Now, this is a matter of opinion, and his is what matters right now. So our teaching concepts may not be what the coach prefers to have taught because he isn't aware of proper mechanics, he wasn't a quarterback, he doesn't know our system or approach, or he just believes another way is better. Regardless, the coach's expectation must be met, and hopefully we exceed that. Because the QBs we train are taught with standards based in measurable biomechanical science and sequentially sound self-correction, they're required to manage input that is contrary to things that now make sense to them, and that causes confusion at times. If what the coach is teaching is causing heavy confusion because of competing ideas, I first suggest that the player meet with the coach privately. The goal of this private meeting is not to prove who's right, but rather to understand the coach's expectation and exceed it if possible. This is your son's dream and opportunity, so let him address it first. We understand the parental and player frustration with differing viewpoints, but I want to be careful to point out that just because a coach is teaching a certain way, it doesn't mean he's completely wrong or that we are completely right. Many times the language being used, the specificity of a coaching point, or the way it sounds without a reasonable explanation can confuse the quarterback. Also, it doesn't mean the coach isn't open to adjustment or can't change his mind if the athlete can demonstrate a better way or respectfully communicate with the coach why he's doing it better. Those are always good things to expect in a relationship with a coach. This involves a time away from the field or after practice when other players are not around, when the QB has obtained permission to ask the questions about what is being trained so they can clear up any confusion with the coach. I would suggest the quarterback approach this time with an attitude of humility, one of appeal, and with questions that seek to understand before critiquing too harshly. If the QB has a dissenting opinion about something the coach is saying, he should argue the point on the basis of compelling reasons behind the need for change. And he should not mention NFA, myself, Coach Slack, or any other coach he may work with. This approach establishes that the quarterback can stand as a man on his own 2 feet and make a defense for what he believes about throwing the ball. To mention other coaches presents a threat to him, especially if he isn't aware of who we are or what we teach. If the coach asks where he heard these things, he can mention where he learned the concepts, but he should remain focused on the content, not the personalities involved. They don't matter. We're not interested in winning the press conference here. We want to win ball games, and that should be your focus and your son's focus in every exchange. The goal of any meeting should always be to allow the standards taught from an NFA camp to stand as legitimate coaching points on their own, delivered with an ordered rationale and not with allegiance to NFA or any NFA coach. We exist to serve the local coach whether they want us to or not, and allegiances are only to the teams they serve, not to us. If for some reason in the meeting the coach is harsh, abrupt, or further confuses the quarterback, then I would recommend you schedule another meeting with your son present. Now, this meeting should be positioned by you as seeking clarification on the coach's expectations, so you as a parent can better serve him when talking at home. You need to emphasize that you're not looking for playing time, trying to convince the coach of anything, but only to help your son better grasp what is being said to him from the coach. During this meeting, start by thanking the coach for being willing to have this meeting of clarification at all. Then have your son ask his questions again. with you listening to the coach's answers. It's important that you talk as little as reasonably possible. You must disconnect your emotions from this process and be professional in your manner at all times. Losing it is never appropriate, even if it feels good. A negative impact from this meeting caused by you as a parent losing it in front of the coach will only ever be taken out on your son. So it's important that you act accordingly. Not to mention the poor example it sets for your son about how to handle disagreements if you're losing it in a meeting where you've asked him to be professional. Once the coach is done answering the questions, whether you agree or not, ask your son in the presence of the coach if he understands what is being said. If not, you may need to say what the coach said in words your son understands. If he says he does understand, then you may need to draw your son out about why he was confused before now. This can lead to other helpful things that come out of a meeting like this. Sometimes the quarterback is resisting hearing what the coach is saying about mechanics because he wanted to hear something else that encourages him. Maybe he's just tired of always being corrected. Or maybe he isn't as coachable as he led you to believe. That happens. When you say what the coach said clearly, there's a closing of the confusion loophole, and the quarterback is forced to accept the reality of the coach's answer, whether he likes it or not. This can lead to a very productive discussion about what's really bothering your son, and it will often come out when that confusion loophole is closed. So important to have this opportunity. If you're unclear about what the coach is saying in response to your son's questions, ask follow-up questions that make sure you are clear before interpreting for your son. At the conclusion of that meeting, if all is cleared up, there should be a go-forward plan and clearly spoken expectations the coach has for your son's improvement. Also, you as the parent should affirm that no special treatment is expected for your son and that you'll keep his comments confidential and that he should not be concerned that you'll be speaking of this meeting to other parents in the stands or on the sidelines. If the meeting is good but there are still unresolved differences in mechanics perspectives, then here's what I might suggest. I would suggest you present our self-correct DVD series to the coach for his evaluation. There should be no review given by you as the parent. The truth is that your opinion really doesn't matter to the coach on mechanics. There should only be a request that the coach watch the material and tell you what he thinks about it, about whether he agrees with what's being taught. Parents must appear neutral at all times in seeking to serve both the coach and their son. The DVD material is built to stand on its own, so it'll be fine. Typically, if the coach watches the video series, he's come back to the parent and the player and declared that that was what he was teaching all along. That's what he meant. It was just said another way. At that point, consider that a win and an opportunity for your son and your coach to discuss more openly what he means and why in the future. It really does improve the relationship. At that point, your job is done. So you as the parent should return to the stands in your role of supporting the coach and your son and put it behind you. If the meeting is civil, but the coach's answers do not satisfy, and he's unwilling to consider the DVD material, or he's just generally offended by the insinuation that he doesn't know all there is to know about quarterback play, then here's what I would suggest. You need to communicate deep gratitude for his willingness to discuss the topic without penalty to your son. It's very important that he understands you value the time he gave. Again, you as the parent should return to the stands and support the coach and your son. Because honestly, any coach willing to take that meeting is pretty courageous, and he deserves your appreciation, no matter his opinion on mechanics. Not everyone is going to agree on mechanics, nor are they going to agree on the way it's taught. You just have to decide if what is being asked of your son is worth leaving over. Coming out of that more challenging meeting, here's a few things. You should encourage your son to obey and serve his coach and teammates to finish out the season. And then you must decide if you'll remain in that situation for the coming years. These are things that you discuss as a family. Sometimes changing programs isn't possible, but it will give time for you and your son to work through the differences and decide if they're significant enough to seek a change. Many times the parent and quarterback realize that being right isn't as important as other things they feel were more important, so they stay and work through it. If a change is made, it's often something more than mechanics that's contributing to the need for departure. So those are things that will come out in your meetings after the fact. In my experience, whenever I've been asked to get involved to resolve these kinds of issues for clients, there's often another very important revelation that comes to parents and to quarterbacks in this process. When I've encountered a young man struggling with what a coach is telling him that is different than what we teach, many times the young man isn't even fully executing what we're teaching either. I tell them that just agreeing with our teaching and principle yet not changing in our training sessions, then calling out his coach in disagreement is hypocritical. I explain they can't have it both ways because they aren't executing for either of us. When they won't change, period, it means they're just doing things for themselves. Many young men like to build allegiances to us because they like how we treat them and feel the knowledge we give them empowers them against a coach they just don't like. Our teaching, in essence, gives them talking points to explain their general dislike for their coach, and they share that with their parents. I've found that often it isn't the mechanics that's the issue between the coach and the quarterback, but rather it's something deeper in the way the coach speaks to the quarterback, relates to him, or he's just generally offended by him at some point. The mechanics differences may be real, but there's often something in the personality differences that fuels the frustration of the athlete. And he just uses the mechanics as the more subtle rebellion point, rather than an outright disrespect on the deeper issue of something he feels is off in the coach's personality. You see, by identifying the quarterback's unwillingness to accept our teaching and change accordingly, coupled with his same attitude toward the local coach, I'm often able to challenge a possible issue with authority in the quarterback's heart. Now, this is a point of immaturity. It's not open rebellion, it's just common teenaged pride, something we've all experienced. I will address the coach's teaching, weaving our approach into it in order to close that confusion gap between what the coach wants and what we want. I close the loophole. This will assist the quarterback in working through their frustration while learning to work with the coach's expectation and grow in maturity to accept teaching in general. There is usually an aha moment for the young man and the parent who sees a beachhead of maturity reached in connecting on the authority issue. It's very helpful. It's not always the case that this happens, but regardless of the difference in views about how something should be done, the NFA coach and the local coach have the same goal in mind, moving the chains toward improvement. We at NFA will always default to serving the local coach as best we can and learning to work within his desires as he is the leader of the program, so we won't go against him. Whether this experience leads to a better relationship with the coach or one that needs to be severed, the objective is always seeking to understand before we get upset or just leave. We must create a process of gathering intel through meetings that give us real coaching points to discuss as a family. All along, we are serving the highest good of the team and not making this a discussion item in the stands or on the sidelines with other people. In the final analysis, all we have is our integrity in handling situations like this. And I believe this is the highest attribute we want to instill in our quarterback. And integrity should not be compromised through slander against the coach in this process by the parent or the quarterback. Now, the definition of slander is simple. It's lowering someone's opinion of the coach when you speak about them. See, it's just very, very important to never assume that the initial disagreement over mechanics is cause for an overreaction or an immediate departure. That is immature on both the parents and the quarterback's part. Putting the meeting process in place provides an outlet for communication, protects integrity, and can lead to a course of action that is best for the athlete in the long run. Even if both parties agree to disagree in the end, it's integrity to preserve respect for the coach and relationship. That is the best way and will always be the NFA way. I do hope this helps you, and I wish you the very best for the remainder of your season. Keep the questions coming, as it's our joy to keep serving this way through Ask NFA. And remember, NFA will make you better faster.